Welcome to this session of Straight Drive Panorama. I'm Sudhanshu Mani. Namaskar. Today we'll again talk to Deepak Sapra, a fellow railwayman who left railways early after completing his management studies and joined the private sector and is now a CEO at Dr. Reddy's Laboratories. If you remember, we had recently talked about his book, The Boy Who Loved Trains, and his passion for railways as such. But today, we will listen to his insight into the subject closer to his work, vaccines. All about vaccines. So, viewers, you see, I attended one of his talks recently, and I present an extract from that and hope you will get answers for many questions you may have. Over to Deepak
Of my
Sapra.
life. So I'll just try to present a brief overview about vaccines, a little bit about history so that you get the context, and then we'll come to what it means for us in the present times. So that's what I'll try to do. I'll take about maybe 15 to 20 minutes to do this. So I'll just talk about vaccines more from the standpoint of what the story of vaccines is right from the very early times. And some of it will be relevant to what we are experiencing today. So I just want to take it from the perspective of how vaccines developed. Uh, so to start with, I think just want to share that the history of vaccines is over 500 years old. This is about the 15th century. This is an image which you see from China. This is an iconic painting from China. Vaccination was first used as a method of inoculation to immunize individuals against the variola virus, which is the smallpox. There was a small fragment which was taken from a patient, and then it was put into people who were not having the smallpox disease, in the hope that a mild but a protective infection would result. And as a result of that infection, the symptoms would come in, but slowly they would subside over a period of time that would indicate a successful recovery and immunity. The method of administration that you see here is that the person would develop pustules identical to the ones which would occur in naturally occurring smallpox. And what it would do is it would produce a disease, but a disease which is a less severe version of what you would normally get if you had smallpox. So this is one example of what happened about 500 years ago in China. And then over a period of time from China and the rest of Asia, it actually spread to Europe. It spread to Europe, and this picture that you see is of a lady who is the wife of the British ambassador to Constantinople, now Istanbul, and Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. And what happened that time was that smallpox was a huge issue even there in Turkey and also in the rest of Europe. So at her urging and at the urging of the Princess of Wales, several prisoners and abandoned children were inoculated by having the smallpox inserted under the skin. And several months later, they were exposed to a real environment where there was smallpox. And what was observed is that none of them contracted the disease. And as a result of that, the procedure was deemed to be safe, after which the members of the royal family were inoculated. It is then that the procedure of vaccination became fashionable in Europe. In fact, very similar to the vaccine selfies that people take these days whenever they're going to a place to get vaccines. People used to have vaccine paintings. And when you're doing something fashionable, it was the high and mighty also used to have paintings of theirs while getting a vaccine done. And that was something which happened in early 18th century Europe. Moving on, I think in the later part of the 18th century, a lot of scientific work happened in this space. And many of you would have heard the name of Edward Jenner, whose picture you see here on this slide. He carried out an experiment on a young 8-year-old child. This 8-year-old child was James Phipps. What Edward Jenner did was that he inserted the pus taken from a cowpox pustule and created an incision on the boy's arm through which he inserted that. And this was a consequence of folklore which was in existence at that time in Britain, that milkmaids who suffered the mild version of cowpox never contracted smallpox, which at that point of time was one of the greatest killers in Britain. So as a result of doing this and running several other experiments, Edward Jenner was able to prove that if a person is inoculated with cowpox, then the person is immune to smallpox. The first person on whom this was demonstrated was this 8-year-old child. Basis this, Jenner submitted a paper to the Royal Society in 1797, but it was not accepted. The Royal Society was conservative. They told him that you are too revolutionary, you're not thinking in a scientific manner. And Edward was undaunted, and he continued this experiment on several other children, including on his own 11-month-old son. And that was a kind of a turning point in the way the acceptance of the vaccination process happened. And when he was able to demonstrate that it worked on his own 11-month-old son, and the efforts bore fruit, that is when his work was looked at in greater detail, and the results were finally published. And the word vaccine was then coined from the Latin word vacca, which means cow. So moving on, I think that's a little bit about the history. What I want to talk about is a little bit about the science of a vaccine. So simply put, vaccine is a preparation that provides immunity, that provides protection from a disease. Usually a vaccine contains an agent that is either the agent that causes the disease or is similar to the agent causing the disease. And they usually, whenever they have the germs that cause the disease, they're either killed or weakened to the point that they don't make a person sick when a person is inoculated with that. So some other vaccines, they contain only a part of the disease germ, and that is how they work. Irrespective of the mechanism, whether it has a part of the disease germ or the entire disease germ in a weakened form, what the vaccine does is it stimulates the body's immune system. It helps to identify a threat and therefore destroy the threat. This is the Ministry of Defense for every individual that nature has created. So if I move on a little bit around how it works, you can see this small visual. So there's a harmless form of the germ that is introduced into the body. The immune system then sounds the alarm, understands how to fight it, and then it remembers. It has a memory. So the immune system remembers that particular germ, that here is somebody who's an enemy. So if that enemy shows up again in the body, which is what it's going to do now, as you see in the visual, the body knows right away that I need to fight it off. The immune system fights it off. And as a consequence of that, the person does not fall sick. So that is broadly how it works. Now, today, if we look at it, there are multiple kinds of vaccines in the world. Without getting into too much of technical detail, there are five ends of this pentagon that you see. One is the inactivated and live attenuated vaccine. This is one of the oldest forms of the vaccine that we see. Then if we move right, we have the viral vector vaccines. We have what is called the messenger RNA vaccines. We have the toxoid vaccines, and we have the recombinant and the conjugate vaccine. So these are the 5 different kinds of vaccines that are currently in existence in the world. A lot of work is actually happening on several other areas, which I'll come to in a bit. So a quick word on each of these 5. On the inactivated and live attenuated vaccine, what they do is they use the killed version of the germ that causes the disease. Sometimes they also use a weakened version of the germ. So for example, there is a vaccine for hepatitis A, there's a vaccine for rabies, there's a vaccine for chickenpox, there's a vaccine for yellow fever. All of these fall in this category, where hepatitis A, for example, is the inactivated vaccine, and the chickenpox vaccine is the live attenuated vaccine. Then if you look at the viral vector vaccines, what they do is they used a modified version of a different virus as a vector or as a mechanism of delivery to deliver protection. There are several viruses which are known to mankind which have been in existence for millions of years. For example, the influenza virus, the measles virus, several adenoviruses. They are used as vectors, and they provide another mechanism by which the vaccination can be done on a human being. So, for example, the current Sputnik vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine are viral vector vaccines. Then the third type of vaccine is the messenger RNA vaccines. Now, what the messenger RNA does, it makes proteins in order to trigger an immune response. They do not contain the virus, and there is no risk of causing the disease because the virus is not there. However, what it does is it teaches the body how to make the protein so that you can trigger an immune response. It's almost like programming. And that is what a messenger RNA vaccine does. And that's why it's so elegant that you can actually, once you know the code, you can actually find a vaccine for it almost as easily as you would write a computer program. Then the toxoid vaccines, again, many... Hello. Yeah. So then we have these toxoid vaccines. Many of us have taken the tetanus vaccine, the diphtheria vaccine. These are typical examples of toxoid vaccines. What they do is they use a toxin made by a germ that causes the disease. They create immunity to the parts of the germ that causes the disease instead of immunity to the germ itself. And that is the toxoid vaccine category. And finally, the conjugated vaccines or the recombinant, they're called by many names, as you can see here. But what they do is they use very specific pieces of the germ, like the protein or the sugar, to trigger an immune response. They usually have a strong immune response, but sometimes the category of disease areas that they're targeting, they often require booster doses. So those are the different kinds of vaccines that we have in the world. And again, this is a very busy slide, but essentially it's about the various kinds of vaccines presented depicted in a visual manner. So I'll move on. I'll move on to what is on everybody's mind, which is the COVID-19 vaccines. So I think there's some background noise. If
Ajay was not mute. If somebody else is not mute, please mute yourself.
Okay, so I'll move on. So I'll talk a little bit about COVID-19 vaccines. And before I get into any details, I just want to share that this is an unprecedented thing that we are seeing as far as COVID vaccines are concerned. In the course of, let's say, 15 months from the time the disease really took over the entire world, there are more than 70 different vaccine candidates, all aimed at addressing this disease in through various mechanisms. Many of these fall in the 5 categories that I spoke about. Some of them are also DNA-based vaccines, but it's just unprecedented the amount of work that's going on in the world as far as COVID vaccines are concerned. I'm just showing a comparison of some of the vaccines, and this is more to demonstrate that what are the kind of things that we look for when we kind of look at a vaccine. So the first thing that you see in the column is something called efficacy. Efficacy essentially means if you take the vaccine versus if you don't take the vaccine, how much more safe you are. So for example, if I say a Sputnik vaccine is 90% safe, what it means is that if you are vaccinated, the chances of your getting the disease are 90% lower than your chances of getting the disease if you're not vaccinated. So different vaccines have different measures of efficacy. This is typically measured through what is called a clinical trial, in which you take a sample of people, you give the vaccine to a certain number of people, you don't give the vaccine to a certain number of people, you observe them for a period of time, and then see that how many of them got the disease and how many of them did not get the disease. And based on that, you make these statistical calculations. Then there are some other things like the platform, which I spoke about. For example, the adenovirus platform, the messenger RNA platform. So there are these vaccines which occur on different adenovirus through different platforms. For example, the Sputnik is on a human adenovirus vector platform, which is essentially the common cold virus. So what it does is it uses the common cold virus as an adenovirus as a mechanism to get inside the body and trigger the immune system. This virus has been known to human beings for millions of years because it's a common cold virus, and therefore it's quite safe on human beings. And we use this as a mechanism to generate the triggers into the immune system. Similarly, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine are used on the messenger RNA platform, which we spoke about a while ago. The AstraZeneca vaccine, the Covishield, is also based on an adenovirus vector platform. This virus is derived originally from chimpanzees. In terms of safety, what we look at is that how long have these been in existence? How long is data available for these vaccines to be safe? And the other thing which we look at is that how do these vaccines get programmatically managed? When I say programmatically managed, it's about how do they get stored, how do they get transported, how do they get applied to the person at the point of dissemination of the vaccine. So there are different storage conditions and temperatures. So Sputnik, for example, has to be stored at -18 degrees, Covishield at 2 to 8 degrees, the Pfizer vaccine at -70, and so on. So that's how kind of one compares vaccines. We can put in more parameters here, but broadly, I think safety and efficacy are two of the most important parameters that we use, in addition to understanding what the platform is and what the mechanism of storage, transportation, and delivery is. So I'll move further. This is a chart which I had made some time back. I will update it soon, and I'm happy to share that with others. Basically, when we started the process of vaccination of COVID, so in the first 3 months of vaccination, because vaccination started on the 13th of December 2020, and from the 13th of December to the 10th of March, I did this analysis in terms of how many vaccines were administered globally, which country administered how much, and as you can see the data, the US really got the lion's share of vaccinations done. The US administered almost 90 million doses in the first 3 months from the start of vaccination. China, the EU, India came in next. Now, there's another way of looking at this data, which is that what percentage of the population got vaccinated. So if you look at it, smaller countries like Israel, in the first 3 months were at about 58.6% of the entire population vaccinated. Today, Israel's number is touching 70%. And likewise, you look at some of the other countries as well. UK did a very good job in the initial months, vaccinating about a third of its population. And even the US got to vaccinating about a fifth of its population in the first 3 months. India today is at about 16 to 18 crores of people vaccinated 6 months from the time the process of vaccination started globally. And this number is approximately about 11% of India's population in a 6-month period. In the 3-month period, India was at around 1% of the total population. So I think that this data captures that. So globally, in the first 3 months, about 330 million vaccines were administered. India started its drive on the 16th of January, and in about 2 months, about 28 million people were vaccinated with one dose. As far as the number of people vaccinated with both the doses were concerned, that number is about 1/10 of this number. So having said that, having looked at all of these things, I still feel that the COVID vaccination program is probably the most aggressive vaccination program in the world that has ever happened in the history of healthcare or in the history of any other disease. So now one question initially which a lot of people had when there was hesitancy with regards to the vaccine. I think a lot of people were asking the question that should I get vaccinated? This number has reduced over a period of time, but there are still a number of naysayers, so to speak. But my view on this, that if you're asking the question that should I get vaccinated for COVID, the answer is a very simple yes, an overwhelming yes, written in big bold letters, because the benefits of getting vaccinated far outweigh the risks that we might face as a consequence of vaccination. Now, some people are also asking, and just before this started, a few people were talking about, I took the vaccine and then I got the disease. So let's take a scenario wherein we say that I'm vaccinated and it's 14 days since I have received my second dose. So let's say in that scenario, what would it mean if I'm with another person who is vaccinated? I think broadly what it means is if there are two people who are vaccinated with the 14 days since the second dose, because that is the time period when people believe that really the immunity begins to get triggered in a meaningful manner. What it means is that interactions can happen. And if you are exposed to a COVID positive person, there need not be 100% necessity of quarantining yourself. And of course, you still need to remain vigilant at all points in time. However, if you are with a non-vaccinated person, there is a possibility that even though you are vaccinated, you might be a carrier, and you could be a symptomatic carrier, you could be an asymptomatic carrier, and you would still have the ability to transmit it to non-vaccinated persons. And therefore, for the benefit of everyone around us, till the time we have the entire herd immunity achieved, a meaningful proportion of the entire population vaccinated, every person who is vaccinated while in public and in situations where you don't know where the people around you are vaccinated or not, you still need to adhere to all the prevention measures that are in place. So I think that's what I wanted to share. I wish all of you great immunity and good health and recovery.